All right, let's move on to the Dallas Cowboys. They start with defensive tackle MAZI Smith out of Michigan at pick 26 in round 1. They go back to Michigan. Luke Schoonmaker, the tight end from Michigan. I think he goes to pick 58 in round 2, a little bit higher than we had expected for him, but there was a tight end run going on there in the second round. DeMarvion Overshone, the linebacker out of Texas. Long player, former safety there. One of my favorite players, Viliama Fehoko, the edge/defensive tackle out of San Jose State. I think he has a chance to make an impact. A couple other day 3 picks that were interesting. Eric Scott Jr., cornerback out of Southern Miss, and then Deuce Vaughn, the running back out of Kansas State. Chris Vaughn, front office member for the Dallas Cowboys. That's his dad. And you may have seen the viral video of Chris calling his son Deuce and saying, "Hey, man, come to work with me next week." Pretty awesome moment during the draft. Love all of those. Watching people have their dreams come true, and then particularly Deuce Vaughn gets to go play with his dad in Dallas. So that's the Cowboys draft. I've got some thoughts. What are your initial thoughts on the Cowboys draft, though?
I think it's okay. I mean, MAZI Smith makes sense for them. They've needed that strength inside for years, and I think finally went hard to address it with the first round pick. I think we've reached this point in sort of football now where when you sort of take a strong interior guy that focuses more on the run than the pass, it just feels unexciting. It's like, I'm looking for a flash. And it's kind of an un-Dallas move, right, to go away from flash and actually aim for some substance. But for that defense, I think it's actually a really important addition for them. Like they have had that weakness inside for so long, and maybe for Dallas more than other teams, it's actually important because you're facing Philadelphia twice a year. They have a cheat code with double cheek push right now. All of a sudden, you're plonking a guy in the middle there who's a brick and saying, all right, I can bring something to the table to try and offset this a little bit. But like they're a team that might actually want to focus on that interior run strength more than other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he stops the QB sneak.
Nobody does.
By himself. Yeah. But run defense generally has been an issue for Dallas. It is interesting hearing Jerry Jones at the press conference acknowledging, I believe it was Russell Maryland was the last defensive tackle that they took in the first round, and they took him number 1 overall back in, 92, 91, 92, whatever it was. Jerry Jones was basically saying, like, we don't do this. Like, we wouldn't even have had this conversation 10 years ago in Dallas to take a defensive tackle that high. But they referenced the structure of the defense, what Dan Quinn has built. I think how loaded they are at edge rusher with Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, Sam Williams. And this has been a multi-year issue, right? I mean, this has been and so over the last couple of years, they've been saying, how do we get this big run stopper? So that part I get. Luke Schoonmaker, I think you hear Mike McCarthy talk about him a little bit, and he was an athletic tight end. I think, which is fine. Production was okay at Michigan. Athleticism's good. McCarthy was talking about the versatility they need in the tight end room. This felt like a need pick, right? You lose Dalton Schultz to free agency. Jake Ferguson gets drafted last year. He's more of a move type of tight end. And McCarthy kept referencing how they need their tight ends doing all sorts of different stuff, right? They have all these different roles, and Schoonmaker can maybe fill those. My theory on the Cowboys draft is that they cycle between grabbing the best players and just filling out the depth chart. Mm-hmm. And this felt like a depth chart type of draft. And I just want to go back through the last couple of years. The times where it felt like they weren't necessarily filling out the depth chart were where they hit the biggest home runs.
Yeah.
That's when it was 2020. They drafted CeeDee Lamb when they already had Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. And it was like, yeah, of course we're going to take CeeDee Lamb here. Also get Trevon Diggs in the second round that year. And then 2021, where it felt like they needed a corner. Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn go 2 picks ahead of them. They get Micah Parsons. Generational type of edge. Like, we haven't seen anybody like Micah Parsons, really. Edge, linebacker, do it all type of player. Hit a home run with that pick. Last year, the Cowboys in the first round, they needed a guard. They drafted the guard, Tyler Smith. So this year, it does feel like a bit of a need-based draft. And even when you hear them talk about it, it's like we wanted to get bigger, stronger, tougher in the run game this offseason, so we got MAZI Smith. And we needed a tight end that could do all these different things, so we get Schoonmaker. And so I'm not saying it's going to work or not work or whatever. I feel better about Cowboys drafts when they do go with the best players. I think they've done a good job at evaluating players through the years.
Yeah.
And I feel a little less good about Cowboys drafts when it feels like they're filling needs. All that said, I think MAZI Smith is fine. Like, he is one of the few nose tackles in this class that doesn't get moved by double teams. Like, that actually can hold up.
Yeah.
And it is, I think, going to have an impact on this Cowboys defense that has had a huge hole on the interior for multiple years now.
That's becoming, you hear all the time about football being cyclical. That's the thing that we're going to start to come back towards that now. Like, we've been headed towards these Kalijah Kancey style players of smaller, quicker, faster, penetrating interior guys. And now every year when you start going through all these interior guys, you're like, can do whatever as a pass rusher, doesn't hold up against double teams, right? It's almost universal, every single one of them. So to me, it's like when you're focusing on Kancey and like that's your criticism, okay, you need to, fine, it is a problem. The dude's 281 pounds. Of course he's going to get moved by double teams. But you also need to put that next to the baseline of what you're saying about every interior defender at this point. Like, that's just the inevitable result of the way the interior players have gone. But it does mean that players like MAZI Smith, who don't get wrecked by double teams, are starting to become rare. And when you're rare, there's a low supply, and there's a low supply, there's high value. So all of a sudden, those guys are going to become high impact, high value players because there's just not many of them left. So I think we're reaching this tipping point now where players like MAZI Smith are going to become more coveted and more valuable again, simply because the supply of them has dried up. And at some point, you still need players on the inside that can stop the run. And PFF WAR values those players a lot higher than you would expect. But I think the league is going to start valuing them again because there's just not many of them.
Yeah, and MAZI wasn't a crazy reach or anything. My consensus board had him at 35. He goes at 26. Because the Bills leapfrogged the Cowboys, there is a world where the Cowboys would have picked Dalton Kincaid, right? Mm-hmm. They had the tight end need. They would have found a way to use him perfectly fine as a pass catcher, and then they could have circled back and got Siaki Ika if they really needed a nose tackle from Baylor or something later in the draft. So the Cowboys are always fascinating. It feels like they're very often one or two picks away from the guy that you felt pretty strong that they were going to take. So it's going to be another, good storyline to follow, watching Kincaid and MAZI Smith and those guys develop.
The tight end pick was interesting because they took him at a time when Darnell Washington was sliding. Darnell Washington was the guy people talked about as being a potential first-round pick. I always thought that was a little bit crazy. But then we reached a period in the draft where there's players getting taken above him that also seems a little bit crazy to me. When you're Dallas and you're a team that does actually covet the inline ability of a tight end, so maybe they wouldn't have necessarily been in love with a guy like Dalton Kincaid, but Michael Mayer had been a guy mocked to Dallas a ton because of that inline all-around ability. Darnell Washington is that guy, and yet they chose to go in a different direction and pass up on somebody with that kind of inline size and ability.
Yeah, Michael Mayer. So in the second round before Dallas picked, Sam Laporta goes to the Lions, Michael Mayer goes to the Raiders, Luke Musgrave goes to the Packers, and it's Schoonmaker who they take as the run continues. Brenton Strange went to Jacksonville after that, but Schoonmaker was next. It did feel like it was like, hey, we have to get our tight end, right? So those are the things that scare me a little bit long term. Like, Schoonmaker's fine as a prospect. It's probably 40 or 50 picks higher than expectation, but you're playing the board, you're playing the run, and that's why it happened.
Yeah, but it's also one thing to sort of pick a guy and get in front of the run stopping, but pick a guy that's in that realm anyway. You know what I mean? Like, if they'd gone, there's a tight end run happening, we've got to grab our guy, and they'd grab Darnell Washington, you're like, okay, the consensus board says that's the right kind of area, or even good value at that point. That makes sense. But when you jump on the train and you're like, tight end run, got to grab a guy, and you pick a guy that's like 40 spots higher than the consensus spot, now it's like that just feels a little panicky. Now we've reached for a guy to stop to make sure we don't get left out in the cold when the run starts. That's where it starts to get worrisome.
Positive note here for Schoonmaker in Dallas. Looking at the things that project for tight ends, 10-yard split is a pretty strong projector at the next level, and he's a 90th percentile player in that particular number. So there's something to look forward to. Fehoko from San Jose State. I liked him a lot. Really good PFF grades. He's an edge in name. I thought his pass rush snaps at 3 technique were fantastic. You see the 90-plus PFF grade he got to the quarterback. Man, I didn't even think he was going to go that high. He felt like one of those under-the-radar, NFL's just going to – he's going to look like a great 6th or 7th round pick. But the fact that he went in the 4th, I'm glad that the NFL was onto him a little bit, or at least the Cowboys were. I think he could really make an impact as a pass rusher.
He's got a really – I mean, he's a very strange prospect. A weird body type, this kind of 275-pound, chunky, big guy. Who actually has like a really nice suite of moves, can win around the edge with the ghost move, which you don't see for a guy that weighs 275 pounds, but also has, inside spin moves, has plenty of power. Like, he's got a lot to bring to the table. But he seems to be, he's not good once he gets past the guy. Like, quarterbacks just sort of take one casual step to the side and walk past him.
The Henry Anderson.
Yeah, and he just goes flying into the backfield having beaten his man. He's got some work to do on that stuff.
Well, that's perfect because you're going to have Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, you got other guys to
he's also
clean it up.
Really quick to leave his feet and try and bat a pass. Like, again, if you're a quarterback and this is your guy that you have to deal with, like 3 minutes of watching his tape and you're like, all right, there's 2 things I can do to make sure he never sacks me. Like, either take a quick step to the side or simply go, ah, and they'll go, and then just walk past him. Like, he's got a few things he needs to work on, but he does beat his man a lot, and that's pretty important.
Just to circle back to the 3rd round quickly, DeMarvion Overshone, he improved his run defense grade by over 40 points last year. So he was horrible against the run in 2021, but he was a converted safety, moved to linebacker, doesn't have a linebacker-looking body. He's super long. He looks kind of like a Jaron Kearse type, and they did bring that up at the press conference. Is he the next guy to cover tight ends and have this versatile role? All that's fine, but he's got some growth as a player, but a lot of people loved Overshone in this draft.
Yeah, there were also 5 straight rounds for the Dallas Cowboys where the user pick, the PFF users during the tracker, were trying to make them select Dwayne McBride, the running back, before they finally selected Deuce Vaughn, the running back. Now, very different running back, but still.
Yeah.
Like 5 straight rounds, everyone was like, Dwayne McBride? No, it's somebody else.
Deuce Vaughn, your Darren Sproles comp, Kansas State. They're both 5'5", whatever it is. I mean, Deuce Vaughn can play, though. He's good. Darren Sproles could, too. But I'm just saying, Deuce Vaughn can play, despite his size, really productive, get him out there with Tony Pollard. I think he's got a chance to steal some snaps.
I mean, historically tiny, but yes, can absolutely play, can absolutely make an impact. He's a good player. He got freaky movement skills, which guys that size obviously have to have. Otherwise, you wouldn't even hear them. They're not factors if you don't have that kind of movement skills at that size. So yeah, like he'll contribute. I mean, he'll make plays. The question is, how much can you use a guy like that? I mean, Darren Sproles is sort of the optimal. Like, that's as much as you can use him, I guess. The Eagles have Boston Scott, who's very similar in terms of size, really, really small guy. Yeah, Deuce, it's going to be fun to see how much they're able to use Deuce Vaughn.
The one other guy I want to highlight is Eric Scott Jr., the cornerback out of Southern Miss. You and I have a fun history of quote-unquote one-play scouting. It's not so much that you just only watched one play, but there's one play that stands out. The one play that stands out to me, Eric Scott Jr. was at the Shrine Bowl. He goes one-on-one with Zay Flowers, who goes in the 1st round. And it was one of the better routes I think I've seen Zay run. A little short in, and I'm like, wow, that's incredible quickness by Zay Flowers. Great route. And this is all happening in like a split second in my brain. Mm-hmm. And then the cornerback breaks up the pass.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Who did that? Who hung with Zay Flowers on one of his better routes? And it was Eric Scott working in off coverage. And you look up his athletic profile, and he's this, my numbers, 90th percentile, numbers that project to WAR, numbers that project to actual on-field production. But the actual on-field production for Eric Scott, not that great at Southern Miss. But you're talking about a potential project in round 6, and did have the good Shrine Bowl and all that stuff. I think Eric Scott Jr., just a guy I'm going to be keeping an eye on. In part because he broke up the pass against Zay Flowers when I thought Zay ran a great route. So there you go. All right, Cowboys grade from PFF, we're going C+. In part, I believe, because of those reaches near the top. Again, I think it can work out. How do you feel about that C+? It's probably one of the worst ones we gave out. I haven't looked at all of them.
It really is it's where you got the value. I mean, MAZI Smith, I think, is fine as a pick. what do we give it? We gave it an average grade. I think it might be a bit better than that. Schoonmaker is the questionable one early. Like I think that's a significant reach given what was on the board, even knowing that there was a tight end run going on. And then later on, I think they reached a little bit for a couple of picks as well, and just kind of trusted themselves rather than the board.